Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Good evening and welcome to this week's first edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight, the handover that never was, the delivery of the last installments of the Zondo report delayed yet again. The country's trade union federations tell us why they are angry following President Cyril Ramaphosa's decision to accept recommendations by the Independent Commission for the Remuneration of Public Office Bearers to increase the salaries of politicians and other government officials by 3%. SAFTU Secretary Zwelinzima Mavavi, COSATU Deputy President Michael Shingange, and FEDUSA's Deputy General Secretary Ashley Benjamin are my guests tonight. And today marks World Refugee Day. According to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, over 82.4 million people have been forced to flee their homes due to the conflict or other persecutions. UNHCR National Spokesperson Laura Padoan and Tifulufeli Tumelem, the CEO of the Consortium for Refugees and Migrants, gave us an appraisal of South Africa's treatment of refugees and how the country is handling this global phenomenon. We'll bring you all this and more in tonight's episode of the Watchdog, which begins right now. The role and design of Parliament in playing an oversight role must be reviewed, and the institution does not have to wait for President Cyril Ramaphosa to deliver the State Capture Commission of Inquiry final report before any action can actually be taken. Well, that's the view of legal analysts, as the release of the final State Capture report has been postponed to Wednesday.
Yet another delay in the release of the State Capture Commission report. The Presidency and the State Capture Commission have confirmed that the final report will be released on Wednesday. The President has committed to table an implementation plan for the report to Parliament within 4 months of receiving the report. Earlier this month, Parliament said it had begun processing earlier reports.
Based on legal advice received, Parliament has already commenced work on the third and the fourth reports. Members implicated while serving as members of Parliament and those who are still MPs have been referred to the Joint Committee on Ethics and members' interest to consider the allegations in order to determine if there was a breach of ethics code. The Research Unit of Parliament has been tasked to analyze the reports with the view of advising the relevant oversight committees or the Rules Committee once final report and implementation plan has been submitted.
Former members of Parliament will also be summoned to account to Parliament in terms of the Powers and Privileges Act. Meanwhile, the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution says Parliament will have to engage directly with the reports following previous oversight failures to cap state capture.
So Parliament will certainly have to engage with that, and particularly any recommendations that Chief Justice Zondo may make with regards to the functioning of Parliament and in particular its oversight role. We can also expect other systemic recommendations in the final part of the report, dealing with, for example, appointments to senior positions in the public service, as well as within state-owned companies. These may require legislative changes, and therefore Parliament will also need to engage with those recommendations. And it will not be necessary for Parliament to wait until President Ramaphosa delivers his response to the report in 4 months' time.
The Chief Justice has already indicated that the state will have to assemble an army of prosecutors to do the work required to prosecute the thousands of miscreants who have involved themselves in state capture. According to Accountability Now, the best way to do this will be to create a Chapter 9 Integrity Commission to investigate and prosecute the persons involved in the corruption that is part of state capture.
The delays in the release of the 5th and 6th State Capture Commission reports have been attributed to the need to ensure there is a quality report to avoid errors. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.
Former spy boss Arthur Fraser is expected to feature in the final state capture report. Fraser recently opened a criminal case against President Cyril Ramaphosa for the alleged theft of millions from Ramaphosa's Phala Phala farm in Limpopo.
The public will see a delay in the release of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture's final reports. The Commission, in a statement on Monday afternoon, said that the handover would take place on Wednesday in Cape Town. The report is expected to feature former spy boss Arthur Fraser regarding allegations of impropriety and wrongdoing at the State Security Agency under the former spy boss's helm. In February 2021, Fraser laid several charges relating to perjury against SSA officials following revelations laid bare at the Commission.
With regard to the laying of criminal cases, you see there were some sensational revelations made during the last week of January, where Dr. Mafumadi, Loyiso Jafta, the then Acting Director General, Mr. Y and Ms. K presented evidence to the Commission of gross maladministration and corruption against me, Arthur Fraser.
Which you deny. You deny everything
I deny,
that they put before the Commission.
But more so, I was so perturbed by the boldness to actually lie under oath, not just to the nation but to the globe.
In December 2021, then Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo dismissed Arthur Fraser's application to cross-examine certain witnesses, as Fraser did not comply with the rules of the Commission that require that an applicant furnish the Commission with his full version of events that he had been implicated in. The report is expected on Wednesday. Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
We will, of course, be bringing you reports on the last tranche of the state capture report on Wednesday when it gets made available. But we'll also be bringing you analysis of the report, the implications it has for those who would have been fingered, but also for the country going forward, as everyone, of course, is interested in ensuring that we put an end to the kind of corruption that was discussed or that emerged from the state capture inquiry. That report now coming up only on Wednesday, and as I say, we will be bringing you a full-on show on that. You don't want to miss that one on Wednesday night. To this now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has accepted recommendations by the Independent Commission for the remuneration of public office bearers. This is to increase the salaries of politicians and other government officials by 3%. The president announced that the increase would be backdated to April last year. While trade union federations have slammed this decision by government, saying it is unfair in comparison to the salaries received by public servants. To discuss this, we're joined by SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzi Mavavi, COSATU Deputy President Michael Shingange, and FEDUSA's Deputy General Secretary Ashley Benjamin. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Ashley, if I may. Why is this unfair from where you sit?
Good evening to you, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewers out there. Well, look, it is highly regrettable that politicians can, hoard them themselves and accept a 3% salary package backdated to April, whilst over 1 million public servants are still battling to get a decent increase. I mean, how many doctors and nurses and police officers are at the cold face of protecting the country, rolling out services, and many teachers to the citizenry, and politicians chose to accept a nice 3% increase. One can't even compare the salaries that they earn compared to the entry-level employees in the public service and many other workers. It is highly insensitive of the politicians to accept such, while public servants must still battle to get, not fighting wage increase, wage freezes, but also battling to get a decent bargain at a bargaining table.
Mike, remind us again of how this, the politicians, as it says, have decided to accept is how it compares with what public service workers had to settle for recently.
No, thanks, but not only that, but there's nothing from where we stand that is independent about that commission that has recommended that increase. We have raised this thing not only now, but when the commission made a recommendation to the president, that it's only them, it's only these two group of elite that is allowed to have a commission that determines their salaries. Nobody else, no other worker in this country enjoys such a privilege. The judges that today are beneficiaries of this 3%, they constituted that commission that determined their salary. So that's the first thing. Which, secondly, was that this group of elite, both the politicians in parliament, particularly the ministers who earn not less than 2 million per annum, all of them, have signed an affidavit and went to court and said the public servants in 2020 do not deserve a salary increase. In fact, when later it went to the Constitutional Court, the Constitutional Court judges said the public servants are ungrateful that in the midst of the pandemic of coronavirus, they can negotiate or in fact demand a salary increase. The judges agreed with the politicians. They agreed with the ministers. They agreed with the parliamentarians that the frontline workers that during the coronavirus were out there defending millions of South Africans, risking their lives and that of their families, are not supposed to get anything in 2020. Yet, later, the two elite group connive, agree that they deserve a 3% salary hike, not only a salary percent hike, 3% hike, but they dated to 2021 at a time when we were the level 5 lockdown, when all of them, they were not on duty. They were sitting at home. These public servants, they were there risking their life, getting into public transport and risking their life. We are saying that some of these people who are getting this 3%, they actually don't spend a cent to carry themselves to work. They are using state vehicles. They are being subsidized. They are having medical aid. These workers are using over 85% of their salary to transport themselves to work. But today, they do not deserve any salary increase in the eyes of these politicians and in the eyes of this judiciary, that today they think that they deserve 3% salary. So we're thinking it is the leadership that is not leading a society that is driven with an inequality that is the number 1 in the world. Because this decision perpetuates and entrenches South Africa being the number 1 unequal society in the world. Because you're having these workers on the ground in the level 1, 2, 3 that can't get anything. You're having people who are getting 2 million, they're giving themselves a 3%, backdated for over 2 years ago. So we do think that it's very insensitive indeed.
So Lindsay Mavavi, from your vantage point?
Well, they are showing the middle finger to the working class in general, but to the public servants in particular. This is insulting, this is cold, this is insensitive, and this is hypocrisy put into the top gear by both the commission that is making the recommendation and those that are accepting the recommendation. For 3 reasons mainly, which are already articulated by my colleagues. The first one is that these guys are already earning obscene salaries. And this is a class of political elites that do not know anymore what South Africa go through in battling to get the ends to meet, to pay their municipality rates, to pay the electricity that continuously increases by 400% in the past 12 years, and to pay the rapid increases in the price of transport cost or the food prices that are out of hand, and that are not even exposed to the dangers that South Africa is facing, because the government actually have increased the expenditure on their security whilst cutting the expenditure on police, public health care, public education, and that is whilst keeping 200,000 vacancies in the public service, something that adds more load on the shoulders of the public service. For that, they do not deserve any increase. Secondly, the very same political elites are actually telling the public servants now, in the current round of negotiations, that they must accept yet another wage freeze. They are offering a 0% as we speak, and they have a gall to tell public servants that they themselves will get 3%. Well, 3% of the deputy president's salary is an 84,000 more to what he's earning already. Takes his salary to a 2.9 million rands. The president's salary doesn't appear in the Gazette, but from what we know, if he have accepted this offer, of course, he doesn't need it, knowing what we now know about the millions under the mattresses and sofas in his house. But if he was to get it as well, he will be getting a cool extra 93,000 rands. Compare that to the national minimum wage in the country, and compare that to the 350 rands that the 10-11 million unemployed are getting as a special grant for unemployment crisis that has been caused not by them, the youth, the women, the black people of this country, but that has been caused by they. And thirdly, these people do not actually, that's where Mike is so spot on, do not deserve any increase. These people, in our view, deserve to be shown the exit sign in the room, because they are flattening the country as we speak. They have destroyed. Tell me, why are we rewarding the Minister of Transport? Because today 80% of workers have to use private transport to go to work, because the transport system, the railway system have been rooted out. Workers have no public transport to go to work. So in addition to that, we are now rewarding him. Why are we giving a Minister of Transport an extra 3%, Minister of Police an extra 3%, when we're picking up 58 bodies in the streets of our country, when thousands of women are being raped left, right, and center, and when there's no one is safe except them who have bodyguards and who have their houses surrounded by police 24 hours, 7 days a week, and when they go out in their cars, rather, they have escorts all over to ensure that they are safe. Why are we rewarding them for destroying every state-owned enterprise, literally? And when our country have signs all over that's showing that we are moving towards a failed state, why are they being rewarded for doing such a shoddy job, for destroying and betraying the dreams of the very same workers, the public servants, whose burden is increasing in the police stations, in the Home Affairs Department, in the correctional services centers, everywhere? Why are we being rewarded? These people do not deserve a salary. In fact, they deserve a salary cut of 50% of their obscene salaries, so that they can they can earn closer to the national minimum wage they insist must be earned by workers in this country.
Okay, well, the president, by the way, you're looking at 3.079 million. Just putting that out there, since you had referred to it or its absence. Actually, let's start then with how the system works. And perhaps that's where, as Mike has suggested, some of the problems start. Is there a way in which, for example, like workers' salaries, for example, could be determined in pretty much the same way that your public office bearers' salaries are determined? Is there a case to be made for that particular system to change?
Well, thank you, Vuyo. I think you raised a very important point. I mean, if you look at the current system, how politicians' salaries and packages are being managed, I mean, it's hypocrisy at its best. The Minister of Finance is consulted and various other ministers before this commission ultimately decide on a salary increase package for politicians. We believe, as producer, that committee needs to be re-looked at and overviewed so that there's public participation as well. The public must have a say in the salary increases of of politicians, as Comrade Vavi has said. Many of them doesn't even deserve that salary. It's under their watch as politicians that this country is being run into the ground, and workers and the poorest of the poor are always the victims of these malfeasance and maladministration. So yes, there is a need to really overhaul the current system of remuneration to politicians and other high-ranking, Chapter 9 institutions.
In fact, Mike, I'm looking at because I was reminded of this by what Ashley just said, the people who were consulted in the process of, before this determination or recommendations were actually made. And if you look at the Gazette itself, where this was the 30th of March, a government Gazette, it says under the Minister of Finance that the minister suggested that a 0% salary increase be considered for all categories of public office bearers for the year 2021-2022. Alternatively, the Commission should consider increasing salaries of POBs at the lower end within the senior managed service, that is the SMS category. So the Finance Minister did actually make recommendations that they seem to have gone against.
No, that's correct. But so that's why we talk about the elite. So you could just make that recommendation. But the difference here is that unlike when you will come to the Public Service Bargaining Council and make such recommendation that there must be 0 increase, and we have an institution of social dialogue in the form of the Bargaining Council, which seeks to democratize the workplace and so also give workers the right to bargain for what they think they're worth of. That gets ignored because ourselves, just like these judges, you see the problem here is that the minister can make that recommendation, but he's talking to the judges who are constituting this committee that is called independent, who are talking for something that they know that they stand to benefit. That is why, and speaking, supposed to be recommending to the president, who is leading a cabinet, and parliamentarians who stand to benefit. There's no way they're going to reject that recommendation. There's no way they're going to listen to the Minister of Finance. Unlike the millions of South African public sector workers who themselves only rely on the bargaining councils and the fact that, and the rules of engagement in the bargaining council, which South Africans and the workers, by the way, fought for in order to give the workers a voice, which these two elite groups have now conspired to destroy by allowing the state to walk away of a signed agreement and renege on it and take it to court. And this very same judiciary agrees with them that it's okay for an employer to renege and walk away, and they all agree with them. But when you come back to this one, they themselves, they disregard the recommendation of Treasury. That's one point. But the second point about your question, Vuyo, is that these people are getting this salary increase, this 3%, from the same public payers that the rest of us are getting, that the rest of state-owned enterprises get it, from where the rest of the state entities that are linked to motherboard departments get it. But it's only when it comes to the provincial and national departments that they are giving the frontline service delivery to our people when they need salary increases. You are now told by the very same treasurer, by the very same public ministers, that in fact the wage bill of the public service is so bloated, it's too high, it needs to be cut. That in fact the rating agencies are watching like hawks. How are we managing the wage bill? That the economy is not growing because the wage bill of the public servants is too high. They are talking about a porter in a hospital. They are talking about a cleaner in a hospital. They are talking about a clerk in the home affairs. They are talking about a nurse at entry level. They are not talking about themselves. They are saying this wage bill is too high. It is stifling the growth of the economy. They don't think about that. When they say themselves must take from the same pot and give themselves 84,000 salary increase per month. Something that is a 3 years a pension or salary for a level 1 employee in this country. They don't get 84,000 per year, but they get 84,000 as an increase in 1 month. That's why we are having a trophy as a country in the world of being the most unequal society. It's not only in the private sector where you have got a CEO who gets 300 million and they refuse to give workers 1,000 rand. It's even in the state that they can do this. So why don't we bring together this money when we determine whoever is administering the public service, whether you are a public office bearer, whether you are a judge, whether you are a cleaner, whether you are a clerk, you get from the same pot, the salary are determined using the same system, the salary are determined in the same bargaining chamber. Why do they come to the bargaining chamber so that we can bargain for our salary increase? So that they can understand what workers on the ground are going through on a daily basis, including the things they have to spend to pay. To date, the workers in the public service can't afford the grocer they used to afford 3 years ago because of this wage freeze. When you go to a supermarket, these people, they buy the bread with the same price that we pay. The cashier on the other side does not know that I'm a level 3 and this other one is a level 15, is getting an obscene 84,000 increase per month. They don't know that. The price of bread is the same.
In fact, I mean, Zweli, to the very issues that Mike just raised around affordability, around performance, around the need to contain the public wage bill given the state we are in or that our economy is in. There's a very interesting thing in the very same government gazette that says that during the consultations with the previous finance minister, the commission was advised about the palace economic status presented in both the medium-term budget policy statement of 2019 and the 2020 budget. And then further down, and this is particularly interesting, in fact, Mike took me to this paragraph. It says, the minister was mindful of the previous salary determinations and the unrestrained salary increases of the public officials' earnings, which stifled economic growth, especially when not accompanied by corresponding improvements of performance in the economy and government services. Zweli?
The first point, those are sound ideas coming from the Minister of Finance, and the suggestions that he made that at least there must be consideration for the lower ranking officials of the government was a sound one in the context of the massive income inequalities even amongst themselves as the public officials. But they rejected that. That's the first concern that I think we are registering. The second part that we are registering, if they were to stick to the principles that are being that you are reading out from the Minister of Finance, tell me what will be the Deputy President earning any money for? He has been sitting at the head of a whatever that committee is heading in ESCOM. What are the results? This conversation can be cut off anytime because there is yet another round of load shedding between today and Thursday. Why are we giving him a 3% or a 84,000 rands more to his already fed check, in addition to all manner of benefits that he's having? Where is the relationship between what in the private sector they call the productivity and the need to remunerate workers fairly? Where is that in this equation in the government when we have now trapped ourselves in an economy that is stagnant, that is losing jobs at an alarming rate, that have an unemployment for young people below the age of 24 that is at 76%. Why are we giving the ministers any money to do what? And to mess up more and to move us faster to the signs we are seeing all over that are written failed state, banana republic. And there is no relationship whatsoever between the decision of the president, the commission, and what the Minister of Finance would have recommended in the process of consultation. What makes us even more angry, the Constitutional Court have colluded with the government in dismantling orderly collective bargaining in the public sector by endorsing not just austerity, by telling workers that it is correct for the government to seek to resolve the crisis of capitalism at their backs, and that from now on they should not even be aiming to raise or to bargain with the Minister of Public Administration or the Cabinet Committee that is known as a mandating committee, but they should actually be speaking to the Minister of Finance, who holds all of the strings to the public purse. Now, here is an irony. The Minister of Finance makes recommendations. We have read them out. They are very clear, and they're coming out from somebody who seems to be concerned about the issues of inequalities within the government. But for convenient reason, the government that was so happy that the Constitutional Court have endorsed the dismantling. Shame on all of the Constitutional Court judges, by the way. Shame on all of you if you are watching this, because perhaps the reason why we are here is precisely because of your biased class view in favor of a ruling elite in the society, that you slept on the face of the public servants in the favor of government bureaucratic or lunatic austerity programs that are being imposed not just to the public sector but to the society as a whole. Remember, it is this government that is driving massive budget cuts on police budget, on the general administration budget, on health budget in the context of the current healthcare crisis, on everything. They're cutting the budgets to the bone, but they have a gall and guts that are unbelievable to turn around and say, fine, we will cut your living standards, we will cut your wages, but we will increase ours. What a typical example of an animal farm situation where all are equal, but others are more equal than the rest. This is what we are being told. We are being insulted and we are being provoked. And the message from us to all workers must be, workers, you are on your own. Workers of this South Africa, unite. We have absolutely nothing to lose except your chain. We're encouraged, by the way, that in the current wage negotiations, the unions are coordinating much more tighter. They have learned from Sibanye steel water strike that was led by AMPU and the NUM, or the strike that was led by the NUM and NUMSA and ESCOM, that they know that if they continue to be divided, the employer will use the divide and rule against them and will impose another wage freeze, whilst their own salaries are being backdated to April. Just imagine, these guys are going to be multimillionaires at the end of April and end of May this month, while South Africa is drowning, literally drowning on petrol prices, drowning on food prices, drowning on electricity, drowning on rates, drowning on everything that is increasingly out of reach for ordinary people. There are political leaders who are killing the future of the youth, are giving themselves these millions and millions in addition to their obscene salaries.
Okay, now, I mean, all of you, I mean, have been referring, especially when it comes to issues of, salary versus or benefits versus performance, making a strong case about the hypocrisy, but also given the fact that, given the reality of who gets consulted before these determinations are made, the elite conniving, as it was suggested. one wonders whether, I'm going to start with you on this one, Ashley, you reckon there are exceptions to be made. And I'm asking this in light of the judges' propositions. Somewhere in the Gazette, there are inputs. The input of the Chief Justice's office is actually recorded, where they were arguing that in terms of Section 176.3 of the Constitution, judges' salaries, allowances, and benefits of judges may not be reduced, open, close quotes. And then further down, the judges propose that the commission should actually consider judges' salaries separately from all other public office bearers. Do you agree with that view? Starting with you, Ashley.
Well, I mean, that's the point I made earlier, Vio. That is grossly unfair that politicians and judges and other high-profile government officials have the luxury of determining and influencing their own salary packages and perks. And let's talk about the one in chief, the Minister of Finance. He's also consulted when these salaries are determined. So purely there's a conflict of interest. If he is also going to benefit by a good increase, he will by all means ensure that he recommends a percentage that benefits himself, similar to the judges. And yet here, public servants must battle at the bargaining table and must do all other sorts of things to get a decent wage. They're not asking millions. They're asking for a decent salary to live so that they can continue doing their service to the country, rolling out services to the masses, teaching, policing, nursing, hospitals. That's all we ask. That's why I mentioned earlier that this needs to be reviewed totally. This whole process of allocating those salaries and perks to those politicians and the elite.
Michael, do you share that view that there are no other categories that deserve, to be treated differently?
Look, just to deal with that question, we must deal it with the progress or regress that the democracy of South Africa is making. Because in a democracy, whose salary deserves to be reduced? If that one of one sector of society of our country is not supposed to be reduced, whose salary deserves to be reduced? That's number one, if we are saying we're in a democratic South Africa. But two, why is it that when South Africa has fought for equality in this country, because we come from a history of a huge apartheid wage gap, which we are trying to fight so hard to reduce and close it? Why must be there a sector of the public sector workers that believe that their salary must be considered separately? Why do you want to have a divide and rule in a democratized workplace, in the workers' rights that are supposed to be equal, in a human rights that are supposed to be equal? Why is it that the very same constitutional court judges that says today their salary is supposed to be determined separately have felt that the millions of South African workers in the public service who are downtrodden, most of them, they don't deserve a salary increase at a time when the cost of living is rising? What kind of a democracy is that? What kind of a judiciary is that's supposed to safeguard the human rights of everybody, including that one of the workers' rights? Why will they want to isolate themselves and lift themselves up above everybody else who is working for the same state, who's in the same democracy? Which democrats are they safeguarding? If they think that they and they only don't deserve a salary cut, but everybody else deserves a salary cut. If they think they and they only don't belong to the bargaining council, but someone else must belong to the bargaining council, they must sit in a commission called independent, constituted by them, and recommend a salary that themselves they think they deserve. That must be a warning for a failed democracy or a failed state. It's actually absurd to have a constitutional judge thinking like that when it's supposed to safeguard and defend an equal right in this country.
I don't know if this would be partly answering the various questions that Michael Shinganga just raised. And I quote, the judge's salary have eroded over the past by over 20%. Judges receive a 2.5% adjustment to their salaries or received, I should say, in the year 2018-2019 financial year, that the effect thereof is that judges presently earn 20% less than what they are entitled to in terms of the Constitution, especially in view of the fact that judges have lost the medical aid subsidy, which they were entitled to receive prior to the 2008 adjustment to their remuneration.
They are bargaining, and but they are being oblivious to their own rulings in favor of government austerity programs, and up to from the Labour Court, Supreme Court of Appeal, right to the Constitutional Court, they have ignored the very same facts that they are now advancing in defense of themselves. When the public servants, 1.3 million of them, were making exactly the same points about how the decision of the government not to implement even an agreed-to contract they have signed with the government in 2018, that somehow in 2020 government simply refused to put even a single cent of any kind of an increase. The judges, the very same people who are saying that their own standards of living have been eroded, are the ones that says that's okay for the public servants. How hypocritical can that be? And they are conflicted. And you know what they're trying to do? They are trying to do something that they have seen being done. Already in the public sector is being fragmented. The general public servants are negotiating in their own chamber called the SABC. The director generals long left the scene. They have their own arrangement, and we are waiting to hear how much they will be raking. Will they be following their political leaders, or will they be getting even something better than that? Okay. And now the judges are angling to get their own environment where they will bargain and for themselves, and basically preparing for their own beds to sleep very nicely, and whilst spitting basically literally on the face of the nurse, of the teacher, of the police official facing a dangerous criminal as we speak somewhere in the corner of the street, or picking up a body amongst the 58 that they are faced to pick up without being counseled on a frequent basis. We are in an animal farm. The judges have now joined the gravy trains, and the leadership of the government is very clear, and the public servants do not matter. They are being told that they are bloated, even though the World Bank tells us every day that the public service in South Africa only constitute around 10% of the total employed persons in our country. Compare that to 18% on average in other countries, and compare that to 30% in the Scandinavian countries. Every day we have swallowed the propaganda that we are bloated, and yet everybody knows. The Commissioner of Police tells us that there is a 60,000 shortages of police. Hence, they have no capacity, and hence their conviction rate is down to 15% for serious crime, and down to 10-11% for rape victims. They are telling us that we are bloated, even though they know that in KwaZulu-Natal, 4,000 teachers have to be shown the door, and that thousands of schools are being closed in the Eastern Cape. They are telling us that we are bloated. Even they know that there are 40,000 vacancies in the public health care in our country, and the 200,000 vacancies in the entire public service. Yeah. Where is this bloated? Okay. But then they follow this ideology because they have signed to a deal with the devils in Washington to impose this austerity on the poor South Africans that are not affecting them, because
so
they get their 3% and their thousands.
Okay, I'm going to ask that we end it there. Special thanks to all three of you for agreeing to come on the program tonight to look at this very important matters. William Zimavave, General Secretary of SAFTU, Ashley Benjamin, who is the Deputy General Secretary of FEDUSA, and Mike Shingange, who is the Deputy President of COSATU, on the back, of course, of that decision by President Cyril Ramaphosa to accept the recommendation from that salaries of public office bearers be increased by 3%. The unions aren't taking kindly to that. We'll see how this story pans out going into the future, but we're going to leave it there for tonight. Up next, today marks World Refugee Day under the theme whoever, wherever, whenever, everyone has a right to seek safety. We look at the situation of refugees in South Africa. Well, today marks World Refugee Day under the theme whoever, wherever, whenever, everyone has the right to seek safety. According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, South Africa is host to over 255,000 forcibly displaced people. Over 76,000 are recognized refugees, while over 170,000 are asylum seekers. To give us an appraisal of South Africa's treatment of refugees and how the country is handling this global phenomenon, we're joined by UNHCR National Spokesperson Laura Padoan and Tifulufeli Sintumelem, the CEO of the Consortium for Refugees and Migrants. Good evening to both of you, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening.
Let me start with you, Laura, if I may. On a scale of 1 to 10, how is South Africa doing in its treatment and handling of refugees and refugee matters?
Good evening. Well, as the spokesperson for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, we're certainly not in the business of giving marks out of 10 to countries for their handling of refugee protection. But I can say that South Africa does have a long, proud history of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers to the country. And it has a very strong policy position. And it's a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. So certainly the policy framework does exist for refugees to be able to access the rights that they need. Unfortunately, sometimes in practice, that's not always the case. So some asylum seekers have been experiencing severe delays with the asylum backlog, for example. And we're also very concerned that others have experienced harassment, intimidation, and discrimination. But I can say that there is a small number of refugees who make their way to South Africa. And it's important to recognize that globally, of course, the vast majority of refugees aren't heading here. We've just reached a very sad milestone of just over 100 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes around the world. And of course, they're fleeing to countries neighboring their own. Many are displaced inside the borders of their own country. And South Africa does take a small percentage of the world's refugees from countries that are experiencing conflict, such as the DR Congo and places like Ethiopia and Somalia.
Tifulufeli, I'm sure you feel you would be perhaps a lot freer, than Laura in, speaking about in your assessment and whether you can actually, rate South Africa.
Thank you very much, Vuyo, and thank you very much for the views that has been raised by Laura with regards to the policy implementation in terms of the protection of the refugees in South Africa. Maybe before we even start with that discussion, we should also remember that this is a very special day for a very unique category of people who have been forced to flee their home country and seek safety in other countries. And COMSA, we really set ourselves with this year's global theme that indicates that wherever, whenever, everyone has a right to seek safety, which then deliberately, directly translate to the issues that we have been calling for the past many years with regard to the protection of refugees in South Africa. As Laura has indicated, that in South Africa, we find ourselves in a situation where one person stays on an asylum seeker system for a number of years without the application being adjudicated, whether to be decided whether a person qualifies to be a refugee or a person does not qualify or meet the requirements to be a refugee. That then has posed quite a number of challenges with regard to asylum seeker, because asylum seeker permit is quite a temporary permit, which then limits certain rights and limit certain activities within the South African context. So on this day, as the Consortium for Refugees and Migrants in South Africa, we observed this day together in collaboration with civil society organizations, in particular with the UN agency, including the UNHCR, so that we can observe and try to recognize and applaud the resilience and the courage of this category of people who are the refugees and asylum seekers who have decided, based on the fear that their life is in danger and fear of being persecuted based on the several reasons, and individual cases. So this day is a very crucial day that even in South Africa, we should be observing it and look beyond the measures of how best can we enhance the protection of refugees who are in South Africa. And the first element will be access to the proper documentation that will then interpret to the refugee status in terms of the Refugee Act of 1998, which then guarantees quite a number of human rights protection and human rights access for refugees, because the asylum seeker permit then limits the access to certain human rights. But we know
just a quick one, Chief Rofel, is the asylum seeker permit, is it something that is unique to South Africa? In other words, aren't other jurisdictions or countries following kind of similar processes and procedures?
Yes, Vuyo, you will remember that once a country signed the Refugee Convention that was alluded to by
Laura,
by my colleague, a person will definitely on the spot receive a Section 22 permit under the Refugee Act, which is a very temporary permit, and therefore the person will wait for his claims to be adjudicated and get investigated by the Department of Home Affairs. But in South African context, we have seen that it takes quite a long time where you find people staying 14, 15, 20 years. We have got people who have got cases of 25 years on asylum seeker permit, whom their claims has not been adjudicated, which then makes it difficult for them to access and seek protection because they are on a temporary permit, and also access other social security benefit and basic human rights and basic services in the country, because the permit that they will be using is a very temporary one, which then makes it very unique. If the government of South Africa, through the Department of Home Affairs, are then implementing what the Refugee Act is interpreting in terms of the 90-day period of adjudicating whether a person qualifies to be a refugee or not, then we will not be sitting with quite a number of challenges that we see on a very unique situation in the South African context.
Laura, I mean, is it for lack of trying, I mean, on the part of the South African government, or as we have heard often, there are capacity and financial issues as well?
Well, we do need to recognise that, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a severe impact on the authorities' ability to process asylum applications. And that's true not just in South Africa, but all around the world. We've seen asylum and reception offices closed due to lockdown. So certainly the pandemic has been a factor. Lack of resources is another factor. But World Refugee Day, as we mentioned, is a day to honour the strength, courage and resilience of refugees in South Africa, also to stand in solidarity and to hear what refugees need. And this morning we heard an event in Johannesburg that refugees need proper documentation. They need their papers, and once they have that status, then they can give back to society. And we also met so many refugees who are graduates, they're running businesses, they're employees, they're giving back to society. So with the proper documentation, with the correct papers, people who have done nothing more than flee for their lives from situations of violence, conflict and human rights abuses, if they have the ability to restart their lives in a new community, then they can give back, thrive and offer their talents and experiences to South Africa.
Okay, and that is where we are going to leave it for tonight. Special thanks to both our guests, Tifulufeli and Laura. On this day, World Refugee Day, it's being held under the theme, whoever, wherever, whenever, everyone has the right to seek safety. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and this brings us to the end of our program for this evening. To join us again tomorrow night, 8 p.m. sharp. Good night.